Is it going?
Live.
Huh? It's live. Okay.
You want to adjust it so
It's going.
your face is shown?
It is.
I'll move it to the side.
That's good.
Yep.
You good? See. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Is my mic on? My mic is on. You can hear me?
Off.
Let's see.
Did you turn the...
Yes,
What about now? Now?
On.
So, okay. It's just down low. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. الواحد القهار العزيز الغفار المقون ليلة بالنهار الكريم الرحمن الرحيم أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله خليله وحبيبه أفضل الصلاة والسلام عليه والتسليم في الدنيا والآخرة ولا نبي بعده صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم فإن خير الكلام كلام الله تبارك وتعالى وخير هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها فإن كل محدثة بدعة فإن كل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. I want to apologize for the delay. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. This is what we say when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us for something that's out of our control. This is what the believers have been taught from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you hear the statement, Hayya ala salah, come, be hastened, be diligent to the prayer. And we've been taught by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, because this is the reality. If Allah doesn't give you hawla, It doesn't give you ability, wala quwwah, and strength, then you will not be able to do anything by the weakness of the human being, the inadequacy of the creation, while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala huwa al-aziz al-ghaniyu as-samad as-samad alladhi lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. So thus Allah, He's not restricted, al-aziz. And He is yani mada, He is also al-ghaniyu, that which He owns everything, and He is as-samadu, the one that we depend on, and He does not depend upon us. So this is why we say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, because it's from the decree of Allah, although we try to be on time. Tomorrow, inshallah, we will try to start on time, 6 o'clock. Before we begin, I want to just mention I made a outline, a post, I put it on the internet. And that is just reminding the people that the knowledge, this seminar is a seminar. And seminar, normally you have a text, you have the book, or Arba'in Nabawiyah, the 40 Hadith that Imam An-Nawawi collected. That is what we intend on covering. So that point I made mention, and that this is considered ibadah. What do we mean we say ibadah? That which is something that's pleasing to Allah. Something that you worship Allah by, which is the knowledge, and it's something that will be greatly rewarded. And thus we have to remember to have two things, if not three, and that is al-ikhlas. That we're doing it not so people can praise us, or people can, have some great thing to say about us, recognition, but to do it as an act of pleasing Allah, because it's pleasing to Him that His servants worship Him, and the only way you can worship Allah is based upon knowledge. Number 2, sidq, truthfulness. You have to be truthful, because part of truthfulness means what you learn, this is not the end of the road. The covering of this material does not mean that that's it. You've achieved it and it's over. No, truthfulness means you have to contemplate this material. Truthfulness means you have to look and try to fit it into how you can use it in your life. Truthfulness also means that you will prepare yourself to review this material, read this material after the seminar, to continue to gain a good understanding, so that you may be a person that benefits from the knowledge and share it possibly with others. Number 3, this seminar does not make you a scholar. Neither is it something that will equip you as a means to fight and debate with others. It's something to help you understand the context of this great classical work. And that's why we're going to mention some explanation from the great Imam Ibn Rajab, who took this book over 100 years between the two Imams. Over 100 years after Imam An-Nawawi died, Ibn Rajab took this and made an explanation none has seen in the history of mankind yet. The 4th point is that people should sign in. We should develop a sign-in sheet for the sisters and the brothers and people online. If you're participating, to get the benefit, and you'll get a certificate, ijazah, at the end of the 4 days, meaning that you passed. Then, number 1, you have to be in the program all 4 days. Reason being, because from the uslub wal amanat, from the mannerisms and responsibilities of this type of program, you cannot give a certificate of completion, in Arabic we call ijazah, if the person doesn't cover the text. You have to cover the text. So you have to be in it, and you must sign the sheet so that we can take account of that. So again, the issue of sidq, being truthful. You can't come one day and then show up on the last day and say, yeah, I finished this, Shaykh, Jazakallah khairan, can I have my ijazah? No, you have to be truthful. Now, and the people online, we're asking them to sign in by using the comment section. You put your name that you want to go on the ijazah, and then on the last day you would either message me, because I have a messenger for Marcus Safina to know, send that same name in the messenger along with your email, and then we will email you the copy of the ijazah. You print it and just put your name in the blank. Everything else is already signed, dated, and so forth. So that will be the procedure for the program. And we also want to say we want to hold the questions and answers until a certain time. There may be a challenge for some, but this is the only way we can try to finish this material. And we don't want talk and interruption, because it's very disturbing, and we want to try to finish this, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. We'll begin by just saying a little bit about the author, both Imam An-Nawawi and Imam Ibn Rajab. If you want to take notes on that, you can, inshallah ta'ala. It's suggested just as taking notes on the text itself. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma ba'd. The author of this compilation that's known as 40 Hadith, the author that's known for this compilation that's called 40 Hadith, he is known as Imam Nawawi. Imam Nawawi. Some say An-Nawawi, some say An-Nawawi, and some say Nawawi. The scholars, they say both of them are correct. The pronunciation is different. The meaning and the context is the same. So this Imam, he gained this name because of the village that he's from. Huwa ismu quryatuhu. It is the name, yani, or this balda, town or village. And it is located in what we understand to be called in those days a sham. Like the pillows that we have, they have shams to a sham. And today a sham is known as the region that we say Syria, Jordan, and Palestine. This is a region. So the imam is from the area of Nawa, which is the village or the town that he's from. Thus he became known as Imam Nawawi, from the town or the village Nawa. Point number 2. This imam, he was born in the year واحد وثلاثين وستمية بعد الهجري. He was born 631 years after the migration of the Prophet. 631 years after the migration of the Prophet. Tell you. That 631 years, you would subtract that from 1442, because now we're in 1442 of the Islamic calendar, beginning this Islamic month al-Muharram, which started, we know, almost a little more than 2 weeks ago, a day or so. So if you subtract 631 from 1442, you'll get 811 years. So about around 811 years ago, this man was on the scene, Imam Nawawi. And that will be somewhere around on the calendar that we use, that is a Greek, Roman, and pagan calendar. We call it Gregorian. That's what 2020 stands for. Then it will be somewhere around, Allahumma salli ala Nabina Muhammad. It will be somewhere around Tis'a, Sittun, Miya wa Elf, somewhere around there. 1169, they like to say AD, after the death of Jesus. Wala hawla wala quwwata billah. Even though we know he didn't die. Huh?
A little more, Shaikh, I think. It's 1200 something. Yeah.
Go back again?
No more, 1200, I think. The Gregorian calendar, it should be 1200 something.
You said 1200?
Yeah, I think 1200.
Okay, so 1269.
I think 69.
Antum hasibina ahsan minni. So hasib. You guys do math better than me.
I think it's more, I think. Yeah, Shaikh?
Check it.
Huh?
Check it. We want to. If you have something, give it. Don't say I think. Just tell me. Research it and tell me. If it's a correction, we can make it now. You're doing the logistics now, right? Jazakumullah khair. So they're checking to make sure that my calculation is correct. At any rate, while they do the logistics, Jazakumullah khair, and Allah bless them. The Imam, he was definitely born 631 years Hijri. And if you were to subtract that from 1442, you will get a number. 811 Hijri. And the issue of the Gregorian calendar, I said 1169. They said it's off. What do we got?
The birth of Imam Nawawi of the 40 Hadith.
We just want the date.
Yeah.
Okay, khalas. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Allah Muslim.
Yeah.
Tell you, we don't have a lot of time. The point is that somewhere around 1169, around approximate, a little more or less, if you look on the Gregorian calendar, so you can understand historically where this man was. You wouldn't normally talk 2020 because that's what most people use. Okay, but the Hijri calendar is our deen, so that's why I mentioned that. And when the people talk about it, they say 631. They don't mean 631 AD. They mean 631 AH Hijri. And so the comparison from 631 Yani, if you take that away from what we're in now, Islamically, 1442, it comes out to be 811 years ago, around that. And then if you take that 811 away from 2020, then you should get what it was on the Gregorian calendar. So what's 811 from 2020?
2020
Then this is the point. So
1209.
what is it?
1209.
1209?
Yeah, inshallah.
Tell you, Barakallah Fik, 1209. Because we have less days on the Hijri calendar and more on the Gregorian calendar. So 1209. Tell you, Barakallah Fikum. So around 1209, he was alive. If you can go and look at what the world was like in Europe, Africa, Arabia, Western Hemisphere, 1209, you'll get an idea of the environment the world was in and how valuable his work was that we have now in that regard. So this is the benefit of that, so you can get a full picture. The Imam, rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Nawawi, he was a special kid. As a young child, he was very special. And one of the stories they tell is that he was known from his youth, his life. They said, kana ya'arifu bi siratihi min sighrihi. As a kid, as a young child, you have stories about him. So you knew coming up in the ranks, he was going to be a big scholar in Imam. And they said one of the things was that one time some children were like trying to get him to come out and play. He was young. Some scholars said maybe 5 years old, 6 years old, maybe 7, around that age. And you know, children play. But he had a mushaf, he had the Quran. He was reading the Quran and he refused. And they kept saying to him, come out and play. And they bothered him to the point, some narration said he started to cry because he was upset with them. He wanted to be busy with something that was godly, like something connected to Allah, which is reading the Quran. So once somebody from the elders seen that and knew of that story, they understood he was going to be somebody really special. So they went and they told his father, they said, look, because his father had a store. And Imam Nawawi used to be at the store a lot of times with his father. And so they told the story to his father, said, you have to make sure that you protect this boy's investment. He's going to turn out to be an imam that the world benefits from because of this type of character. This is unusual for a kid. So the father then took him to an imam and said, raise him up based upon knowledge, meaning teach him, let him stay with you and your lessons. And, he was between his house and the masjid as a young boy. And by the age of 15, he was from the greatest scholars already in our time, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. They said that he was Imam fi Zuhud. Kana Imam fi Zuhud. Zuhud means you take a little bit of this world. You take what you need and the rest you give up. This is what's called Zuhud. They said he was an Imam in that. And when we say Imam, we mean he's an example. Just like when they say Hafiz, they don't mean he memorized the Quran. Today we say Hafiz, we mean he memorized the Quran, because we have this type of understanding. But in the old days, if they said Hafiz, this means, of course he memorized the Quran as a young boy, 9, 10, 11. But Hafiz meant he memorized thousands of hadith, hundreds of thousands of hadith. And so this is what's making an imam in the old days, not the fact that he memorized the Quran, because that's a given. You have to start with Quran. The everything stems from the Quran. The Quran aslu yani kulli shay. But when they say hafiz, they mean he is a person who has not only memorized the Quran, he has memorized hundreds of thousands of ahadith of the Prophet, and he is a person who has preserved the knowledge, and he is called al-hafiz al-imam. So this imam, he used to eat just a little bit, and they said he would have 1 meal a day. Kana yani yakul yani marra yani fi yawm. He would eat once in a day. And they said ba'd al-isha'i, after isha. But the scholars, they said during that time isha was known in 3 categories. You have isha tul ula, the first thing they call isha, which is considered maghrib, as Allah mentioned about fasting. Yani, and Allah said, Yani, continue your fast ila layl, until nighttime. But this is talking about Maghrib. So it says, Isha ula Maghrib. Isha thani, what we know to be Isha now, after Maghrib, Isha, that we pray now, the last portion of the night before it becomes midnight, and then the third Isha Thalitha, the middle of the night. So it said he would eat Yani Ba'al al-Isha Thani, after what we know to be real Isha, if you want to say that. He would eat that one meal. And he was a man who his mom would Yani send him Yani his clothing, his stove, and his father would send him the meal. And he died at age 45, living this life the way that you heard it, being busy with knowledge. Even in the time of war, when people was fighting, he was still in the safety zone, or the areas where he could teaching and rearing the people with knowledge. So this is Imam Yani Yahya. Some call him Sharaf ad-Din, the one who has been blessed with the religion. Yani Yahya is his name, bin Sharaf an-Nawawi. Naam, rahimahullah ta'ala. So he is the author of the 40 hadith. The one is going to explain it came Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. His name is Abdurrahman ibn Ahmad. This is the one we're going to take his explanation. His explanation. His name is Ibn Rajab, like the month of Rajab. So his name is Abdurrahman ibn Ahmad ibn Abdurrahman ibn Rajab. So this Ibn Rajab, his grandfather named him Rajab because he was born in the month of Al-Rajab. And this Imam, he came in the 700th, I think they said 700 and Allah Muhammad, I think they said Wahid Talathin wa Sab'amiyah, 731 on the Hijri calendar. Wamad Yani Kamsa Tis'in wa Sab'amiyah, and he died at 795 on the Hijri calendar. So Imam an-Nawawi lived to be 45, and Imam Ibn Rajab lived to be 59. But the accomplishment was like they lived to be 80, 90, 100 years old, that which they left for the Ummah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show his mercy upon them. Ameen. The first hadith is the hadith. I don't know who has books. Who has books? Some people have books. Tayyib. The first hadith, and we skipped over some of the introduction that talks about whoever yani man hafidha arba'ina hadithan ba'athahu Allahu yawm al-qiyamah ma ulama wal fuqaha. You have different hadith. Whoever memorized 40 hadith or collects 40 hadiths for the Muslims, then Allah will raise him on the day of judgment as an alim and as a faqih. This hadith is not authentic, but it's been narrated so many times it became famous in the books and on the tongues of the people. Also, yani hushira yawm al-qiyamah faqihan wa shahidan, will be raised as a faqih and as a shaheed. You have all of these narrations. In the beginning of the introduction, that Imam an-Nawawi himself mentioned, they are da'if. And people used it to show the virtue of collecting for the hadith, while the Prophet mentioned an authentic hadith, nadarallahu yani na'man yani sami'a, whoever yani hears the hadith of the Prophet, then the Prophet he said, may Allah enlighten his face. And that person yani oha kama sami'aha, and he narrated just like he's heard. He narrated just like he heard it. And then the Prophet said, Ruba, maybe a person who doesn't understand it as best as the one who heard it. maybe that person, he will, maybe the one who didn't memorize it, but he heard it, maybe he will pass it on with a better meaning than the one who memorized it. So this hadith is authentic, and this is an encouragement to not only read, not only study, not only memorize, but to be involved with the likes of this great compilation for the hadith. So hadith al-awwal, this is the first hadith. And hadith al-awwal, the first hadith. عن أمير المؤمنين أبي حفص عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إنما الأعمال بالنيات وفي لفظ النية. So the first point, sometimes niyat with a open ta, which is plural. Other times niyah with the ta marabota, the round ta with the two dots. Same meaning, two different wordings. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ إِمْرٍ مَا نَوَى فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كانت هجرته للدنيا. And sometimes in another wording إلى الدنيا, للدنيا or إلى الدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه رواه Bukhari wa Muslim. So this is the first hadith. Ibn Rajab, he says about this hadith. So we're going to give explanation to this hadith now from Ibn Rajab. Somebody want to quickly read the translation, quickly. Who can read it in English good?
I'll read it.
Faddalu. Read it loud. And you know you need the mic because you have people upstairs. So can you sit here if you're going to read throughout the whole program? It's okay if you don't want to be in the camera. You're shy. That's no need. But if you sit here, you can take that mic and read. Inshallah ta'ala. Quickly, inshallah, because of the time. Zakmallah khair. We plan, inshallah ta'ala, to try to cover, if Allah wills, between the time we have tonight, we want to try to, and Allah knows best, try to cover for each hour 3 hadith. We're going from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9. If we can do that, we'll cover 9 hadith tonight, inshallah ta'ala. Faddalu.
It is narrated on the authority of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Abu Hafsa, Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiyallahu anhu.
Abu Hafs or Abu Hafs? Abu Hafs.
Abu Hafs,
Aywa.
who said, I heard the Messenger of Allah say, actions are judged by motives, so each man will have what he intended. Thus he whose migrate hijrah was to Allah and His Messenger, his migration is to Allah and His Messenger. But he who migrate for some worldly thing he might gain, or for a wife he might marry, his migration is to that for which he migrated.
Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair. And you have the mic with you, right? You have the mic.
No, I don't.
You do?
Oh, let's see.
Yeah, because you have women upstairs they need to hear.
Okay.
Barakallah fikum. And so have a reader, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, he's going to use the mic. You didn't hear the English translation, basically because the time, he mentioned the Prophet, he said in the hadith that's collected, and the first hadith of Imam an-Nawawi, the Prophet Umar said he heard the Prophet say actions are by motives. And everybody who has a motive or yani have what he goes after. So whosoever makes a migration, meaning leaves one land to another land, then that person, if he did that because of what Allah and His Messenger requires or tells a person when to leave one land to another, then he's going to have a reward based on doing what Allah and His Messenger said about migrating. Whoever goes from one land to another for some worldly affair, business or something, or to make a marriage contract to marry somebody, whether the man travels for a lady or the lady travels for a man, then that person is going to have the result of what his motive was. This hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. The first point, this is a technical point of the hadith, but it is needed. This hadith, Ibn Rajab, the one who explained this for the hadith, he said this hadith comes from the narration of Yahya ibn Sa'id. Yahya ibn Sa'id. And some people might say, well, what does this have to do with anything? But it's important. Understand, be patient. Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari narrated this hadith to his scholar, or he got it, I should say, pardon me, from his scholar. And that person, Yahya ibn Sa'id, he learned it from somebody, so he passed it on. This is how Bukhari and Muslim got it, because Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari is from amongst the he's from amongst the teachers of people that was studying with him that became scholars. So the knowledge was passed on from Yahya ibn Sa'id to the likes of whoever was sitting with him that became scholars, such as Bukhari and Muslim. He got it from Muhammad ibn Ibrahim at-Taymi, who is, again, these are people that are from the third, second generation, fourth generation, which means they're close to the companions. They are students of companions, and people that didn't meet the companions, but they met the students of companions, they got this knowledge and they gave it to those people that were sitting with them like you guys are sitting now, and that's how the knowledge was passed on. That's how I got from Bukhari and Muslim to books which, like Imam an-Nawawi collected in his 40 hadith. And Al-Qama ibn Waqas al-Laythi, and this is the person that heard it from Umar, Al-Qama, and he heard it from Umar ibn al-Khattab. So you see, it's a short chain of three people. Short chain of three people till you get to Umar ibn al-Khattab. So this is one of the ways that you can understand if it's authentic or not, because the shorter the chain of people, after the people have been verified and credentialized, and or people that have a good memory and they're not sinners, they're going to have integrity with the knowledge and what they say, and they're not going to lie and cover, then this is one of the ways you determine as a scholar of hadith if the narration is authentic or not. So those people who say you can't take a hadith that has one chain, because there are some people that say that from the scholars of Islam. Whether they're right or wrong, we don't want to discuss that, but there's some people that said if you don't have more than one narration about something that has to do with deeds, worship, Quran, the Day of Judgment, the Jannah, the Hellfire, things that have to do with Iman and Aqidah meaning what you believe that's tied to your heart, what's a credence for you, then say we can't accept that. Because we don't know if it's, lying on the Prophet. We've got to protect the religion. But you see, this chain, all three of these people that are mentioned, from Yahya ibn Sa'id to Muhammad ibn Ibrahim to Al-Qama, all of them are big ulama of their time. They are people that have been written down in history, their truthfulness, their integrity, their level of piety, and the knowledge that they have. And so this is one of the discrepancies with this hadith, some people do not accept it because they said it only comes from Umar, and so they do not accept it. But this hadith has been by the scholars of old, from the muhaddithin wal fuqaha, they have unanimously said that this hadith is sahih. And the men that narrated, they are upright to the most. They're not known to be openly with some sin in society, and they are people that they only narrate what they heard accurately, and they are from people of knowledge that passed on this hadith through the generations. Now, so that narration, it's important to understand that it's one of the hadith that only has one chain. That means Umar is the only one that narrated that hadith. He is the only one that mentioned the hadith on niyyah, although there's many other narrations that people talk about niyyah. This is the only authentic one. But thus, it's accepted. It's in all of the books. Point number two. So that was the first point about this hadith. That it's the only narration about niyyah, and it's on the authority of Umar, with a chain of 3 people in the hadith, 3 narrators, and all of these people are exceptionally agreed upon by the scholars of the past that they are trustworthy, reliable, and upright. So there's no way that this hadith can be rejected just because it only comes by one means of transmission. Number 2, this hadith, some scholars said that this hadith represents thuluthul ilm. Thuluthul ilm, a third of knowledge. What they mean by a third of knowledge is that knowledge has different compartments. Knowledge has different things to it. From amongst knowledge is a niyyah. You have to have a motive, because if your motive, if your niyyah again here we said it means qasd, in Arabic your aim. Yani azima, what you decide to do. It also means arada, what you wish or you want for. So if you're doing it to be seen or to be praised, but you're not doing it so that you can learn and worship Allah, then this is one of the types of motives that a person has. So here, because it is essential to have a clean motive for knowledge, then they said the thuluthul ilm. It's a third of your knowledge. To have niyyah, meaning a qasd, a aim, a motive that is clean and pure, not to do it for worldly reasons, meaning to be praised or to be in the spotlight, but because you want to learn and you want to worship Allah by that knowledge. Number 3. Point number 3. Some of them, they said that this hadith, it has been entered into at least sab'una abwaba min al-ilm. It has been entered into at least 70 different chapters or perspectives that scholars have written about. 70, and this is the least. When they say sab'un, this means yani aqal. At least 70 different chapters. If you were to go in a library, Islamic library, and just do research, you'll find this hadith in at least 70 different scholars' writings in various chapters. If it has to do with marriage, somebody's going to put this hadith first to remind you to be sincere, to be upright about your marriage. If it has to do with transactions, somebody's going to put this hadith. If it has to do with fighting in the battle, somebody's going to put this hadith. If it comes a book about talabatul ilm, seeking knowledge, somebody's going to put this hadith. They said it's mentioned and used in at least 70 chapters or perspectives that the scholars have written about because of its importance. They also said, Ibn Rajab is bringing these narrations from the likes of Imam al-Shafi'i. We don't have time to mention every single point. The likes of Imam Ahmad, the likes of the likes of the likes of Yahya ibn Ma'in, these great scholars of the past. These are those people who Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, these are the people who talked about this hadith, mentioning these statements. It's a third of knowledge, or that is ruba' ilm, it's a fourth of knowledge. Some said that, some said Madar al-Islam, that Islam represents these, or these things represents Islam. So this is all the talk the scholars have mentioned about this particular hadith and more. From the benefits of the hadith itself, the ulama, they said that this statement, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, this statement is mentioned. We said again niyat, which is plural, like you say intentions with an S, or motives, as it was read in translation. Or you say niyyah, a person's actions by that motive. So it's singularly used and it's plurally used. Singularly used and plurally used. And both of them are correct. One of them in the wording in Bukhari, one of them in the wording in Sahih Muslim. Both of them are correct. From amongst that's point number, that should be point number 5. That's point number 5. Point number 5, that it's mentioned in the plural and singular. And that's why the wording is different in Bukhari and Muslim, because it's mentioned in plural and singular. The meaning is the same. The meaning is the same. The next point, the number 6, they said that this hadith, it is a hadith that shows the difference between your worship. Something I mentioned earlier in the khutbah. النية تميز بين العبادات. It is something that you use to distinguish or to identify or to separate between two types of acts of worship. Now we gave the example in the khutbah. For example, and we said again, niyyah, don't think of it as like the traditional something you say, something you pronounce that people spread, and that's wrong. That's not from the way of the Prophet. That's something people came up with. It's a misconception or some falsehood at most. And when you think about niyyah, think about what you feel in your heart. What you think about, nobody knows. You don't voice it, but you feel or you decide something and then you get up. So when we say niyyah, it means a person's mind and heart, because everything starts in the heart. Your feelings, your decisions, what you think. It's not the brain. It starts in the heart. And then the heart sends its own neutrons and different things to the brain, and then the brain does its function. So when you think about niyyah, think about the heart. When you think about your mind, think about the heart. So here, the 6th point is that this niyyah, this action, the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is showing you that there's a difference between what one person may do and another may do. And this is reflected in the hadith, as he mentioned a person, yusib dunya. He's seeking something worldly. He's going to do trade. Or amra'ati yankihuha. Another man, he just wants to get married. He doesn't want to do trade. So this is two different motives. But the issue we're talking about with worship, if a person is praying, for example, 2 rak'ah, and that person is praying not the 5 daily prayers, praying what's called sunnah. You're praying 2 rak'ah in the masjid. Let's say you're praying 2 rak'ah, and it's dhuhr time. It's an example. And to tusalli raka'ataini, yani tahiyatul masjid, for respecting the masjid. There's a special practice not to come in and sit down and eat and talk. Pray 2 raka'ah, then sit down. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this in his sunnah. A person comes in to do that, and then he realizes in his mind, and he registers, oh man, I didn't pray Fajr. We said that person, yes, he can distinguish in his mind, in his heart, at that point, this is no longer the 2 raka'ah for greeting the masjid. This is my Fajr. Although he didn't call in iqama, although he didn't call an adhan, because there's talk, do you have to call it or not? Yani, is it an obligation? But everybody agrees you have to pray Fajr as a Muslim. At that point, he can stay in Salat, she can stay in Salat, he doesn't have to taslim, start, okay, I'm going to pray Fajr now, then call the adhan, call the iqama, doesn't have to taslim, okay, Allahu Akbar, that's my Fajr in his mind. No. Just tumayyiz in your heart, distinguish, decide what you're going to do at that moment internally. But the opposite is not allowable. You cannot, for example, start praying Fajr, and then you say in your mind, oh man, that's right, I didn't pray my sunnahs of Fajr. I normally pray them at home, but today I was rushing. So I'm going to change this Fajr to my sunnahs. You're saying all of that internally to yourself. You can't change your Fajr out loud, the first rak'ah, to silent. This is my sunnahs. You do 2 rak'ah, you get up and you say, okay, that was my sunnahs, although I started Fajr. No. Why? Because the obligation, Salatul Farida, a'dam min al-nawafil. It's greater than the thing that's not a compulsory issue. So you can't demote from what's higher to lower, but from what's lower to higher you can go. From what's lower to higher you can go. You can change your niyyah for a lesser salat to become the obligatory salat, but you can't demote from the obligatory salat to downgrade to the nawafil. You can't do it. Now, so this, I didn't mention the khutbah, that extra point that you can't do the opposite, but you can do that which is supererogatory, that which is voluntarily, that which is not the 5 daily prayer. You can turn that by changing your niyyah to that which is obligation. So that is the, I think that's the 7th point. 7th point. You can change, distinguish niyyah from what's voluntarily to what's an obligation, but you can't do it the other way around, from an obligation to what's voluntary. Point number 8. You can change your niyyah from one thing that's obligatory, fard, to another fard. You can change it, switch the niyyah from fard to fard. Yumayyiz bayn al-fard wal-fard. It distinguishes between one obligation to another. For example, if you're praying with the people Asr, and then you realize, oh man, I overslept Dhuhr. I didn't pray Dhuhr. At that point, yumayyiz fi qalbak. In your heart, you decide, this is Dhuhr for me. You don't break the salat. You don't have to pray by yourself. Pray by way of distinguishing, determining the motive, the niyyah inside, and then when you finish, then you pray Asr with some people who are late or by yourself. Will make it bayn ibadat. Now, also they said ada. The ulama ada. Ibn Rajab mentioned this, like akal, yani eating, wa noam, yani sleeping, wa kasaba, yani rizqa, yani and also working to earn some wages. If a person is doing that, the motive is to please Allah, although it's a customary act, but you yourself want to eat so you can have strength for the worship because you're tired. I'm going to eat a little bit so I can be ready for the next salat. I'm a little bit weak. You want to sleep so that you can be vibrant Yani for the morning prayer or for the prayer in the nighttime. You go to work so that you can earn, so you can spend on your family and get a reward. Spend yani in the masjid, get a reward. Spend on the poor, get a reward. Spend on the students of knowledge, get a reward. Then your normal work ethic becomes worship. How? يُمَيِّزْ بَيْنَ ibadat wal adat. You use the intention, the motive internally to distinguish between your motives for customary and worship. Customary can be turned to worship if you change the motive from customary to worship, although it's customary. Point number 8. 10? Who said 10?
I thought it was 10.
Huh?
9? It's not 10? Sorry, brother.
What point did you have? I have 8. Am I wrong? I could be wrong.
I'm sorry. 8.
It's 8 here.
8. Okay.
What?
Point number 8.
Point number 8.
How do I know?
No.
Huh? Point number 8. Point number 8.
Inshallah.
They said that this hadith, the Prophet mentioned, وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِلدُّنْيَا. Whoever he travels. Think of hijrah here as traveling from one place to another. Because this is what it means linguistically. انتقال من بلد إلى البلد. To travel from one place to another. So replace the word hijrah, travel. Travel somewhere, lidunya, a job, lidunya. Dunya here means worldly affairs. So dunya here, worldly affairs. You travel for a job. You travel for business. You travel to buy something. Number 2, you travel to get married. A lady travels to get married, or a man travels to her to get married. I know that was the beat for the Maghrib. Patience, inshallah. Then a person travels for religious issues. Religious issue here also means amen, safety. If you go from one place to another because your land is not safe, this is a religious issue. Yani hijra li aman awal ad-din. What you can worship in that place, but worship is being restricted in this place. Then the reward is not the same. The reward is not the same. So this is the point the Prophet is making, and not that traveling for worldly fairs, traveling for marriage is blameworthy. Lakin laysa sawa. They're not the same. And it's possible a person can travel for religious reasons, and during that time he travels and he obtains some worldly. He travels, he obtains some marriage. It's possible, it's permissible. But we're talking about the individual motive itself. Lastly, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, last 2 points. They said this hadith, the Prophet Ibn Rajab, he mentioned that the Prophet people yani kashtara fi kutub al-fuqaha, it has become famous in the books of the scholars who explain the religion, that هذا hadith سبق قصة مهاجر al-Qais. That this narration, the Prophet mentioned that hadith because of a story about a man who made the migration for a lady called al-Qais. A man is in Mecca. A lady leaves Mecca, makes hijrah to Al-Madinah. Hajarat ila Al-Madinah. وَهُوَ بَاقٍ فِي مَكَّةَ وَهُوَ يُرِيدُ أَن يَتَزَوَّجَهَا. He wants to marry that lady, but they're in 2 different lands. He's in Mecca, she's in Medina. It became a famous story that the Prophet mentioned this hadith because of that story. So the man that says Sammahu Hajar al-Qais, so he gained the nickname Hajar al-Qais, the man who made the hijrah, the man who traveled from Mecca to Medina to marry al-Qais. Because she told him, I will marry you, but you have to make hijrah. This narration, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he tells this story. He said, كان في عهدنا رجل سماه حاج al-Qais. He said, it happened in our time, there was a man who gained the nickname the one who made hijrah for al-Qais. The scholars, they said, just by هذه السياق يدل على أن هذا ما حدث في عهد النبي. They said the wording of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud shows that it didn't happen in the time of the Prophet. Because when they talked about something that happened in the Prophet's time, they would say, كان في عهد رسول الله, in the time of the Prophet. Or they would say, كان سنة عندنا, it was sunnah with us, meaning we learned this from the Prophet. So the fact that he said, يعني كان عندنا, this means in his time the Prophet already died. During our time, meaning the Prophet died, the Prophet is not alive. So that's how we know that the Prophet didn't mention this based on the story of the man who made the migration to marry al-Qais. Although it became famous, although it became known in the books, people say that, لَيْسَ بِدَلِيلٍ عَلَى هَذَا. It's not a proof of that, meaning that the Prophet mentioned this hadith about niyyah, intention, because of that story. So this is the first hadith of Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and inshallah ta'ala we'll continue after Maghrib. وهذا وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد. أيوة. وين هو؟
Bottom corner. Finishes at bottom
Yeah.
corner.
Oh, the head outside? Not no more? You sure?
Yep, right there.
Should I do it with the mic? No.
Double click it.
You hear me, probably loud.